In the stillness of the forest, where shadows stretch long and the air carries an unnatural chill, a creature lurks, tall, skeletal, and silent. Known as Siren Head, it towers over the trees, its gaunt frame blending seamlessly into the darkened landscape. Its skin, rough and mottled like aged bark, clings tightly to its emaciated body, every rib and joint grotesquely visible. Its appearance is a nightmare given form, a creature of impossible design that feels ancient, as if it had been here long before humanity, waiting. But it is its head, or lack thereof, that chills the soul most deeply. Perched atop a long, sinewy neck are two rusted sirens, cracked and weathered like relics from a bygone age. These speakers hum with an eerie static, breaking the oppressive silence with sounds that make the hair on the back of your neck rise. It was the summer of 1998 when Alan and his two best friends, Mark and Jesse, decided to explore the outskirts of their sleepy rural town. The trio often spent their evenings pushing the boundaries of their courage, venturing into places parents would scold them for. They had heard about the strange sounds coming from the woods, a low, warbling siren that seemed to echo for miles on some nights. Old Farmer Dugan swore he'd heard it while tending his fields late one evening. It was like something out of the war, he'd told anyone who'd listen, but it weren't no storm. There's something out there. Most of the townsfolk brushed him off, but the boys were intrigued. That night, as the sky turned from pink to black and the crickets began their nightly song, the three set off. Armed with flashlights and an old camcorder Jesse had borrowed from his uncle, they were determined to prove they were braver than the rumors. As they entered the forest, the air seemed unnaturally still. The usual chorus of insects and distant rustling of animals was absent, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. The deeper they ventured, the more it felt like the woods themselves were watching. "Do you hear that?" Alan whispered after a while. His flashlight trembled in his grip. The others stopped, straining to listen. At first there was nothing, just the faint rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Then a low hum began to creep through the air, faint and distant. It sounded mechanical, like the hum of an old radio struggling to find a signal. Mark shrugged it off, laughing nervously. "It's probably just power lines or something. Nothing to worry about." But Alan wasn't convinced. The sound grew louder as they walked, evolving into a distorted static that seemed to seep into their bones. Then, cutting through the noise, came a voice. "Alan! Alan, where are you?" Alan froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was his mother's. He turned sharply, shining his flashlight into the dark trees behind them. Nothing. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Yeah," Jesse said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But that's impossible. Your mom's at home, right?" Before Alan could respond, the voice came again, louder this time. "Alan, come here." But there was something wrong with it. The tone wavered unnaturally, like a recording being slowed and sped up at random. It was layered with static, the words breaking and distorting. Panic began to set in. Mark grabbed Alan's arm. "We need to go. Now." But Alan didn't move. He was staring into the distance, his flashlight trembling. That's when they saw it. At first it looked like a tree, a tall, thin figure standing unnaturally still among the other trunks. But as their flashlights swept over it, they realized it wasn't a tree at all. It was a figure, impossibly tall and emaciated, its skeletal frame stretching over the treetops. Its skin was rough and mottled, blending eerily with the bark of the surrounding forest. And its head, if it could even be called that, was what made Alan's stomach drop. Instead of a face, the figure had two enormous sirens mounted on a long, sinewy neck. The sirens were cracked and rusted, with wires dangling loosely like veins. They swiveled slightly as if scanning the forest, and from them came the garbled voice of Alan's mother, now layered with static and something that sounded almost like laughter. The boys stood frozen, their minds struggling to process the nightmare before them. Then the creature moved. It didn't step or walk like a human. Instead, it seemed to glide, its impossibly long limbs moving in a way that defied logic. As it shifted, the sirens blared a deafening wail that shook the ground, making the boys drop their flashlights. Jesse screamed, fumbling for the camcorder, but Mark grabbed him by the arm. "Run!" he shouted, and the three of them bolted, the siren's scream following close behind. Alan glanced back once, just once, and what he saw would haunt him forever. The creature was moving faster now, its elongated arms stretching unnaturally as it pursued them. The sirens emitted a horrifying mix of distorted voices and static, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, Alan thought he heard his own voice calling out from the noise, pleading for help. The boys didn't stop running until they burst out of the forest and onto the empty road that led back to town. They collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping for air, too terrified to speak. The forest behind them was silent again, but the oppressive feeling of being watched lingered, like the creature was still there, just out of sight. When they finally made it back home, they agreed never to speak of what they'd seen. Jesse tried to review the footage on the camcorder, but the tape was blank, just static. Mark moved away the following year, and Jesse avoided the woods entirely after that night. As for Alan, he could never shake the feeling that the creature hadn't forgotten him. On certain nights, when the town was quiet and the air was heavy, he swore he could hear it. The faint echo of a siren calling his name from the forest. And he knew, deep down, that if he ever answered, he'd never come back. This expanded version builds on the tension and fear, giving the encounter a deeper sense of dread while leaving an air of mystery surrounding Siren Head.